Okay, so let's talk about local versus global variables in Python. So a local variable is basically a variable that's created inside a function and cannot be accessed by statements that are outside of the function. And different functions can have their own local variables with the same name because what's local is not going to be seen by functions that are outside of the scope of that function. So basically, what we do is that any function that we create within any variable that we create within a function is going to only work within the scope of that function. Now, in contrast to local, a global variable is a variable that's been created outside of all of the functions. An example would be when we create a variable, say let's say x is equal to 5, and we're assigning a variable value 5 to assignment to variable value 5 to variable x, but outside of any function. So what happens that this can be accessed by any statement that is in the code, including within the function. And if we are using a function that needs to assign a value to the global variable, we can return it and re-declare that value within the function using a method called global. So we can say global, and then we use that variable name for this example. Okay. In general, as we start to write more complex programs, we are going to try our best to avoid using any global variables. Some companies might even ban using global variables for their developers because global variables make debugging very difficult. Anything that's outside of a function, it's hard to be understood, and there are many locations in the code that might be using that variable or wrong variable, and it's just something that's very frustrating and hard to transfer to another program. So basically what we do is that we're always trying to use, again, as we more write functions and we are breaking down our programs into simple parts, we always try to use only local variables. So let me go through a simple example just to show you what's the difference between these two. So I have defined a variable called x, and I've assigned variable 5 to that. So let me just remove all this. So first thing first, this is an example of a global variable. So we can, when we print x, we see the value of 5. But now we can have the same variable. Let's say we have variable x, and what we do is that I'm going to turn x to, let's say, 7. And now we're defining a variable called x times, and we are multiplying x by 5. So we're receiving a value and we're multiplying it by 5, and then we're returning that value. Okay, and then we're printing x. So let's see what happens here. So x was 7, and as we go through the function, x is still going to be 7, but now let's call the function. So we have function and we call x here as the input value, which is an example of a local variable. So now we give this 5, and then now it's x is 5 within that function. So 5 times 5 is 25. Note that this x is not going to be transferred within the boundaries of a function, because if it was, a return value should have been 35.